All right, we're going to go ahead and kick this off. Our participants have kind of leveled off. We still have some folk coming into the room. So welcome to Rural Physical Activity, an active roadmap of best practices in rural mobility. I will allow each presenter to introduce themselves as opposed to me introducing all of them. But I want to thank all of you for attending. As a person with a pretty big interest in rural health, I'm really excited to see and hear these presentations, but I promise I will do my best to be the moderator as well. I want to thank all of our presenters for sharing their time and expertise, as well as our partners, like at the CDC for helping to make this webinar happen, and the folks at Smart Growth America. As you have questions, go ahead and put them into the Q&A feature in your screen. If you want to, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. You can put your name, where you work, contact information, email address, those kinds of things. And I will go ahead and allow Anushka to take it away as our first speaker. Thank you all for joining so much.
Thanks, Alan. I'm just going to bring up my screen. Looks okay?
Looks good.
Perfect. So thank you, Alan, for kicking us off, and for Physical Activity Alliance for organizing this and having us here today. I am Anushka Thakkar. I'm a program manager for the Thriving Communities team at Smart Growth America. I have a background in transportation planning and public health. So I support the work of the National Complete Streets Coalition with that lens in mind. And I was asked to briefly speak about how I got here, my role of work, and my journey. So basically, I did my undergrad in urban and regional planning, after which I spent a summer studying cycling cities in Amsterdam. And a little fun story there, which was when I signed up for that course, it was a month-long program, and they required all the students attending, which included people from 20 different countries. We were all required to be on our bikes at all times. And I thought they were crazy. I thought it was not possible, but I did it, and it was just a brilliant experience to have. And since then, it was just no going back. I could experience that it was possible for communities to be built in a way where you can walk and bike, or take the bus or take the train, and having or not having a car does not change your quality of life. And as someone who hates going to the gym, I also realized that I didn't have to. Because my commute became my daily dose of physical activity, and it was a lot more fun. So from there on, I decided I wanted to pursue my master's in public health and specialize in transportation planning, post which I got this role at SGA, and 3 years, I think it's been 3 years. And here I am. So very happy to be here and talk about this report that came out earlier this year. It is an absolute pleasure to present this report, because this topic was not my expertise when we started scoping this report out in 2021. But we have a lot of my colleagues have done extensive work with smaller communities across the country, and under their guidance and wisdom, we were able to put this resource together. So it was definitely a huge team effort and an insightful journey to be developing this report. We did some literature review as part of this report, and also interviewed communities from across the country, which led me to meeting some very inspiring leaders and champions who are doing great work to make their small towns and rural communities activity friendly, some of whom are joining us today on the panel, and I'm very excited to be in conversation with them today. So briefly, for those of you who may not know, Smart Growth America is a national nonprofit that does a lot of work across different aspects that impacts our communities. This includes the Farm-Based Codes Institute, LOCUS, which is the Coalition for Real Estate Developers. It includes the National Complete Streets Coalition that I am a part of, the State Smart Transportation Initiative, which is our research group based at the University of Wisconsin, and Transportation for America that leads our federal advocacy work. And our North Star at Smart Growth America is we believe and envision a country where no matter where you live or who you are, you can enjoy living in a place that is healthy, prosperous, and resilient. And we do this through our impact model, as you can see, through thought leadership, which includes reports and resources such as this one that I'm going to talk about today, that feeds into our advocacy, and all of our learning then feeds into the technical assistance support that we do across the country with communities. Before I get any further, I do want to thank CDC's Active People Healthy Nation initiative for their support to develop this report. CDC's Active People Healthy Nation initiative is focused on promoting activity-friendly routes to everyday destination across the country by using built environment and land use interventions. So I encourage you to check that out. Okay, so what is this report? When we started this report, our main goal was to change the notion that smart growth or active mobility or active transportation is an urban concept. Because often we get pushed back towards investments in active transportation in small town and rural communities, when actually the needs of these communities are not that different from those living in urban areas. Everyone living in urban or rural areas needs to access basic necessities every day. And contrary to what is often portrayed, rural areas do not mean farmlands. Many rural and small town communities have a town center, a bustling main street, and all of these destinations need access. And assuming that everyone will or can drive to those places deprives many of easy and affordable access to daily needs. So in this report, our attempt was to define the spectrum of rural communities, get into some common myths that we hear about, and emphasize that active and multimodal transportation is very much needed in these communities. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to walk through the report first, and then we'll get into why it matters. And then we also have a little polling that we're going to do at the end of my presentation. Okay, so let's get into the nuts and bolts of this report. If you peeked at this report, you would have noticed that it is organized in 4 distinct parts. So part 1, which is what is rural, is where we define 7 distinct rural typologies. Part 2, which is what are the unique needs and challenges of rural communities, which loosely translates to our lifestyles and day-to-day needs and demands in rural communities that differ from urban communities. Part 3, which is how can active and multimodal transportation be encouraged in rural America. In this section, we discuss some strategies to address the issues that we identify in part 2. And then these strategies are presented alongside some success stories from rural communities, which I think it's my favorite part. And then part 4, which is how can your rural community improve? We discuss particular actionable steps to build more activity-friendly communities in rural America. So part 1, the main takeaway for this from this section is that there is no one single definition for rural because of how diverse these communities are. So as part of this report, we developed these typologies based on past work that Smart Growth America has done across the country. And I do want to note particularly that we recognize that this is not an exhaustive list. And these are also not mutually exclusive. Which means that often communities may have more than one of these typologies. So it can be a gateway community, but still be a traditional Main Street community and so on. So starting at the top, we have gateway communities, which are those that are adjacent to public lands and rely on visitation as a primary economic driver. We have resource-dependent communities, which are established around a single natural resource, such as mining or agriculture or trade. We have retirement and second home communities, which are built to particularly serve the needs of older adults. We have the traditional Main Street communities, which have walkable and centrally located downtown core. Up next is college communities, which are towns and cities that have a large university-associated population, followed by edge communities, which are those that are rural but are on the edge of an MSA. And then finally, we have tribal and Native American communities. Moving on to part 2, which is unique needs and challenges. We wanted to get into this idea where rural communities are often thought as opposites to urban areas when it comes to economies, demographics, culture, and various other factors. And while there are cultural differences across different communities in the country, we strongly believe that dividing our nation into such a binary format has immediate and consequences for people in their daily lives. So in this section, we get into some common myths that we hear about rural and small town communities, such as, are rural communities homogeneous? Do rural communities enjoy a healthier living environment than urban areas? Do people in rural areas have longer driving trips than people in urban areas? Is transit a feasible option in rural areas? And finally, do rural communities have better access to parks and nature? Moving along to part 3, which is essentially, like I said, it's the most fun part, which is a bunch of case studies from across the country. I'm going to say this, we had a huge list of communities we wanted to profile, but obviously there were limitations in time and resources. So there are a lot more communities that are also doing great work out there. And I'm just going to briefly talk about some that we profile in our report. So starting at the top, Excelsior Springs, Missouri. We have the panelists here from Excelsior Springs and then Chillicothe, Ohio. So I'm going to skip them and let them tell their story. But followed by Chillicothe on the screen right now is Montpelier, Vermont, where we talk about how they have sustained physical and social connections between neighbors to use community engagement model to sustain relationships. We have the Amtrak Downeastern Maine rail service, which has a great story about how they tailor the service to serve diverse needs of different users and support connections to services and healthcare up until Boston. We have a story from Irving, Tennessee, which has just done a tremendous job in turning their town center into a vibrant walkable hub. We talk about Oxford, Mississippi, where they really recognized and honed in on the economic benefits of complete streets and are improving walkability in the downtown to support local businesses. We have a case study from Ruston, Louisiana, which has just done a great job attracting and retaining residents through improved connectivity. Then we have Paris, Texas, which is a great story about how they have leveraged intersectoral partnerships to provide affordable transit in the region. And then finally, we have Osage Nation, which has truly demonstrated the importance of having a vision to implement complete streets projects that serve the community. Which is a great segue to part 4, in which we talk about the roadmap and takeaways. The first one being having a vision for your community, which includes taking that first step of really looking in on a community's local identity, defining activity centers, and recognizing your assets, followed by the second action step here, which is establishing systems to support economically sound transportation and land use decision. This includes everything, including evaluating your current policies and plans to know if it supports your community's vision and helps you leverage the assets that you have. The third one here is realigning transportation priorities to support the community vision, which in this section, we talk about the importance of having a complete streets policy and also exploring creative ways to test changes that are made on the streets through demonstration projects, which can be a significantly less resource intensive process than a full permanent infrastructure process. And finally, investing in transit and focusing on tailoring it to work for your community. This was particularly important because we do have, like I said, mentioned a couple of transit case studies in the report from Paris, Texas, Chillicothe, Ohio, and Downeastern Maine, who all have transit in their communities, but they all don't look the same. So we wanted to emphasize that it is important to tailor the service to the needs of your communities for it to work. And then before I switch sections, I wanted to use this quote to summarize essentially what I've been talking about from Melinda, who you're going to hear about later in the presentation, who said, oh, sorry. I think the poll came up, but I'm just going to read the quote. We have to think about it being a right-sized community because we are a tourist destination. We want to remain a destination. We don't want to grow into the next largest city next to us. It doesn't really benefit our growth as a tourist community. We really like the green space between us and someone else. We will lose our identity if we become an extension of the city, which summarizes the importance of sort of is a good summary of all the action steps that I just alluded to. So why does this report matter? This matters because we are talking about 60 million people, or about 1 in 5 individuals who live in rural America today. And while only 20% of the US population lives in rural communities, they account for 49% of all traffic deaths. And a recent report from the Governor's Highway Safety Administration also found that The risk of dying in a car crash was 62% higher on a rural road compared to an urban road for trips of the same length. It is also a challenge for health outcomes because studies have shown that prevalence of meeting physical activity guidelines is roughly 22% lower in rural areas than urban areas. But studies also show that people are just as likely to walk in rural communities as compared to urban communities if options are safe and accessible. And finally, there is a shift in preference with the newer generation today. Studies show that younger generations tend to make decisions about where to live based on lifestyle preferences and not jobs. And they prefer living closer to places where they can walk and they don't have to own a car. So that's another reason where this comes in. And I'm gonna note this quote from Elizabeth, who we interviewed from the Montpelier case study, who said boomers and millennials, both generations who think they have nothing in common, actually want the same things now. Everybody wanted to have that house, and now everybody's aging and no one wants to drive. Everybody wants to have a place downtown. And then finally, before we move on to the polls, I wanted to close out using this quote from Calvin Gladney, who's the president and CEO of Smart Growth America, who emphasized the need to revisit our outdated understanding of rural and small town communities. And he essentially emphasized the importance of dispelling misconceptions about the identities and experiences of rural communities. And through case studies of those strategies that a range of rural communities have used to build healthy, stable, and thriving places, we hope to inspire decision makers to not only better understand the rural context, but effectively invest in tailored solutions that help these dynamic communities reach their potential. Okay, that was a lot of me talking. So let's do some polls. We have 4 polls for you all to respond to, and I'm gonna go through them. But let's see, Ayana's gonna help me bring that up. So let's do it.
Are you able to see this, Anushka?
I am not. I don't know if it's visible to everybody else.
I cannot see it either.
It's showing that I'm getting responses.
Oh,
Okay, we're good.
maybe if you share results once the polls are closed, I may be able to see it then. Don't see it yet.
The numbers are climbing, so people are answering the 4 questions. I'll share my screen in a second so that you guys are able to see it, Anushka.
Okay.
For the sake of time, we can go ahead and cut it off and start showing the results. That way we have time for the other speakers. That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I see the results now. Okay, so the first one was all of those were pick the correct statement. And I see we have a little bit of split between option 1 and option 2, option 3, sorry, option 1 and option 3. And the answer was everyone drives too much. So studies have shown that there are actually similarities in driving for rural and urban communities. And actually what the driving factor is the density. So low density rural areas and low density urban areas have shown more driving, more average trip distances compared to compact rural and urban areas. The next one, I see most of the people got this right. Oh, sorry, my screen is just taken control without. Okay, transit is definitely an underutilized transportation option in rural communities, and assuming that everyone can drive negates the needs of 1 million non-drivers in rural areas. Moving on to the third one. I see the majority also got this one right. And I know the third option is also kind of right, but for the purposes of this report, we are going to stick to option 2. And just going to allude to that quote from someone we spoke to in Bozeman, Montana, who said a lot of people in Montana don't think twice about taking their car and driving 3 hours to go camping for the weekend. And in fact, that's part of the lifestyle. This not only has accessibility issues for those who own a car, but also significant environmental consequences. And then quickly, the last one, it was a little bit of a given here, but yes, option 1 was the right answer. There is no definitive statement to be made on health benefits of living environment based on community typology, but there are health challenges that rural communities face because they do travel. Studies have shown that they have to travel twice the distance to access healthcare compared to urban residents. And thank you. Apologies for the technical difficulties. Thank you for your patience, and I'm going to hand it off to Mayor Luke Feeney from Chillicothe, Ohio.
Can everybody hear me?
You are good. Yep,
Great. PowerPoint live.
I can see it.
Fantastic. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Luke Feeney. I'm the mayor of the city of Chillicothe, Ohio. It is a rural community about an hour south of Columbus, which is in the center of the state, a city of 22,000 people. It's actually Ohio's first capital, and recently became, well, has always been the home, but recently was designated a World Heritage Site for our the historic burial mounds in the region. So an area that will be attracting quite a bit more tourism, but is also nestled in the foothills of Appalachia and is in the second largest geographic county in all of Ohio, pretty rural, mixture of hills and farmland. I have been in office for almost 8 years. Next week, this time next week, I'll know if I'm going to be in for another 4. Running for re-election. Before I was mayor, I was the city auditor for 3 years, which gave me the opportunity in that office to sort of get the lay of the land when it came to how city finances work, fit together, and identify some of the sort of issues when it came to some of the projects that I was fond of. When I first got into office, the city had very little in the way of any type of plan. Whether that was mobility management, physical activity. Our last comprehensive plan was from the 1940s, and we didn't even know what the definition of complete streets was. And so when I got into office, I live downtown myself. I grew up using public transportation, relatively active person, and we started doing projects sort of as they came or where we saw opportunities. Without any plan at all. So in the first year, we have a state route that runs through the city, and ODOT was going to do a big project that should have had a sidewalk on it, but was scrapped before I got in office. And we pushed hard to put that sidewalk back into practice. And used state funding to pull it off with a little bit of local match. So we had relatively good success doing little projects or sometimes big projects without any plan. But as things progressed and as we began to partner with folks in the community, we were able to start to plan and do some more interesting things and really start to think about the future and how activity and mobility factored into our community. And so my slides are a bit scattered. I'm going to move fast. I think I have about 2 minutes a slide or a little bit less. But one of the things that we have had a lot of success with is partnerships across the community. The health district, the library, we're a small town. Our city resources are somewhat limited. And we are relying on our partners to help with things like committees that can help move along initiatives. And so over the past several years, we have supported and acted on the actions of an active transportation committee. We have helped put a mobility manager in place for the community, and we've learned from those recommendations. And so one of the things we recognized was us as a city, as an entity, we didn't have strengths. And so we looked for partners who did, who had sort of similar ideas to us. And that has helped us think through safety improvements, get different perspectives on improvements throughout the community, and move things along. And so one of the takeaways I've had over the past several years is partnerships create incredible opportunities. At times I felt lost because of our internal resources, but partnerships have been the way to go, both within the community and then external to the community. So just some takeaways as we're thinking through trying to pass our first complete streets policy is that we had what we thought was a pretty good policy, but when we started to look at the actual enforcement, it was a little bit strong, and we realized there were things in it we just couldn't hope to enforce right now. And so we haven't taken it to council yet, but we want to tie it to things like the zoning code and the building code and really think about its enforceability so that it can be a successful plan. So as I was talking about partners, in 2020, the city of Chillicothe and myself were part of the Harvard Bloomberg City Leadership Initiative. And within that, we became a part of an innovation track. And what we landed on was redesigning our transit system. Our transit system, I think, is somewhat unique in that we have a city income tax, 1/10 of 1% of the residents and city employees' income is taxed, and it goes to a transit system. That enables us to have quite a bit of matching capacity through ODOT and federal funding, and enables us to have a local transit system. That transit system dramatically underperformed for years. It did traditional fixed routes that were not particularly efficient, and just basically drove in circles all day, for lack of a more eloquent way of putting it. So we tackled that project. I grew up using city transit, and I knew that we had a lot of opportunity. And so we had a coach, and we worked through a really innovative process to summarize lots of public engagement, lots of testing. You see a trolley there, and you see sort of a shuttle van. We tested that trolley first and really wanted a trolley to sort of, not just because it's a neat thing and it's cute and people would like to ride it, but what we realized was that transit and the transit system in Chillicothe really had a stigma that it was for low-income people. It wasn't accessible or accessed by people of different incomes throughout the city. And so the trolley from internally and as part of the process really served as a gateway to the transit system. People who don't or didn't use the transit system now sort of using it and realizing that the trolley is part of it, but then learning about other opportunities within that system. And so I think externally, the trolley is a fun touristy type of asset. And then for us internally, we really wanted it to be a gateway to more transit options. And you'll see below there that transit van. We had added to our fixed route system, essentially an on-demand system. What we realized was that we had the capacity based on our routes, based on our budget and schedules to basically expand our services. And now we operate several vans that scheduled ahead essentially operate as a municipal Uber. And so we really went through a long process to get there. In both situations, we did tests. We actually rented a trolley that we brought to town for 2 days to test it out. I think we had 700 riders in 2 days. And we did the same with the vans to see if a on-demand system would actually work. One of the big things about testing was that we acknowledged up front that we had to be ready to fail. We didn't know what would happen when we tested these projects. And the whole point and what we try to communicate to the public was we were trying to learn, which is a difficult thing in government, especially when you're thinking about elections and, not wanting to let people down and make mistakes. And one of the takeaways from that process was really being able to express that you're trying and testing, and that something may or may not work. And so, some more key takeaways there. Those prototypes were really important for us, and really the feedback from the residents, both in the creation of the project and then the sort of the use of the product, creating something, whether it was the on-demand or the trolley, that was really meant to serve the public well, as opposed to our preconceived notions. Initially, the trolley was ruled out very early as one of our projects. And then as we continued through the process, we brought it back in, and it became a very successful part of the city. It's still going now. We're actually running the trolley on demand and fixed routes completely free. We have been since 2020. You'll see that takeaway down there is that we always test our assumptions. So we definitely made assumptions about the fixed routes, we made assumptions about on demand, and then the trolley as well. And testing them is important. I think in rural America, especially, you can't just pick up an urban transit system and drop it into a rural community, whether that's because of mindsets or geography or infrastructure. And so that was an assumption that I had to abandon pretty quickly on, because the testing showed it was just basically wrong. Bouncing around a little bit, one of the things I want to emphasize is that we try to get wins, both big and small. And so while we're working towards bigger projects, we think about smaller projects too. And so last year, as a part of our annual budget, we took a small amount of our rescue plan money, and it became a general fund replacement revenue. And we knew that mobility and sidewalk repairs was important. And the law in the city of Chillicothe is that residents have to repair sidewalks in front of their property. That had not been enforced in possibly ever, but certainly not in the last 11 years. And so before we wanted to start enforcing it, we wanted to encourage people to make repairs themselves. And so we did a matching program, contributed some general fund money, opened up a application portal, and let folks apply to do some repairs. You'll see some of the results there. This was another thing that we tested by getting with contractors, making sure that the project would work for them, and discussing with residents their needs. And you'll see there, we ended up, I think, with 70 applicants in a short period of time, far exceeding what we thought we'd have, and a total of $220,000 in repairs. And so while on the one hand, we're talking about complete streets projects, mobility management, revamping transit systems, at the same time, we're also thinking about how to repair a sidewalk in front of somebody's house that hasn't been done in years. The phase 2 of that project will be ramping up the enforcement, but also as a part of that, trying to think of ways to make it affordable for people to do long needed repairs, like assessing to taxes over several years, low interest, that sort of thing. So back to partnerships. This is something that the city has had not a huge role in, but we're trying to help with. And that's the Book a Bike. So we have allowed for kiosks to be placed at a couple places in the city, supported with funding and a couple bike parking stations. But again, this is kind of being aware of what your partners are capable of or interested in. And right now we're at a place in the city where you'll see the partners there, the health district, healthy communities, public library, and the city all pulling in the same direction, knowing that we have the same or similar concepts towards a better, healthier community. And then this leads to our partnership with Smart Growth America this past year. Probably about this time, I started with the 9-month project with the Champions Institute. This again was a learning process for me, coming in with ideas that we were hopeful to enforce or implement, quickly learning that those ideas were beyond the scope of what we could pull off. So we adapted midstream and tested a few things with the goal of traffic calming and accessibility and making parts of our community safer to walk. And so you'll see different areas we tested. Speed radar, we tracked before and after to see what happened with speeding. We placed speed humps in the park. Thank God I told everybody that this was a test, because this was this got more reaction than I think anything I've done in the last 8 years. Extreme on both sides, very few people indifferent. But again, was a test. You can see in that the little slide there that it says it's a demonstration, pop-up demonstration, but it did slow traffic down. Admittedly, we learned that the speed humps we put in were maybe a little too humpy, a little too big, and if we ever go back to that sort of thing, we'll bring them down a little bit. The size, we realized some drivers couldn't really see the size, so even if they were going the speed limit, hitting these speed bumps might have required a chiropractic visit. So again, we live and learn. And then the last circle there, you see a pedestrian island that we installed, which has become permanent. It's a strange sort of 5-way intersection, not great for pedestrians, and on a street that has pretty high traffic. So we installed that high visibility crosswalk there, and that whole yellow area and triangle that you see is new. It really made it a dangerous place, a place you wouldn't even want to cross. Much safer now, and slows traffic down quite a bit because they can't take the hard angle that they, or the angle that they used to take to kind of cruise onto that next street. And then the last slide is another example of partnerships. This is a park that we just opened 2 weeks ago. This was a partnership. The woman in the top left slide is a former councilwoman. This was a partnership between our local land bank, the city parks and rec department, AARP. The woman had the former councilwoman had an old lot with a dilapidated building. We used grant money from the state to help tear it down. She donated it to the city, and then we used AARP and other funds to just drop a neighborhood park right in the middle of the city. And it has new sidewalks around it, accessible play equipment. And what we thought was really interesting about this project was that playgrounds, and as far as the AARP is concerned and others, really serve as places that are activity for everybody. Even if the play equipment is mostly created for kids, the idea is that AARP members or people that age get out, enjoy the bench or the table, or with grandkids or children, and enjoy the space. And so this was another one that we used a lot of public feedback. There was the best part about it was that the kids got to vote, kids across the community and preschools and other, even at the park one day, got to vote on the equipment that was eventually installed, even down to the color. So we really had fun with that project, and we're happy with how it turned out. And just another small or big win, depending on how you look at it. The size of the park is small, but we thought it was a big win for us. So just in conclusion, I think, I think some of the themes I've learned from the past 8 years is that while we're moving towards bigger wins, we can pick up small wins along the way. Partnerships are everything to us, whether that's locally or national partners. Community feedback is essential, both for buy-in and for creating great experiences and products. And then finally, trial and error, being willing to test something, especially in local government, being willing to tell people that you'll try and potentially fail. It's a hard thing to do, but it is somewhat liberating if you're able to pull it off. That concludes what I've got, and I'll pass it on to the next person.
Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you're at. My name is Melinda Mahaffey, and I am the economic developer for the city of Excelsior Springs, Missouri. And I have with me Councilwoman Sonia Morgan, who's been on our city council for 9 years and has owned a company, Morgan Sites, for over 20 years here in our community. She and her husband are instrumental in creating a lot of our historical data just through pictures, which we're very fortunate to share today, even on our presentation. As a community, we are a community of about, if we can go to the next slide, a community of about 11,000. So we're about half the size of Mayor Feeney's community. We're 25 minutes from Kansas City's urban core. We have a traditional main street. We are very tourism oriented. Many people know us because the Elms Hotel and Spa is in our community. We are also known because we have a mineral water system that is unlike any other in the United States, and we are home to the largest water bar in the world, and you can see that over our shoulders. There's a picture of it. We have very limited resources as well, and so when COVID hit us, it hit us fairly hard. If we could go to the next slide, our concern was that tourism is our main industry, and as our main industry, for the community to have lost the ability to have individuals come into our community and participate was really very concerning. We realized at that time that we had some shortcomings that we needed to address. That when everything began closing, we realized that many of our small businesses were unsure of how they were going to be able to move forward and do that successfully. So we heard from businesses that said, I don't know how I can get my product out if I can't bring people into my store. I don't know how people are going to eat my food from my restaurant because I don't have a way to share my menu with them. I don't have a way to explain to people why they want to come to our restaurant, because they were coming before in groups of people to sit together and have a meal. And now we're telling them not to do that. And so it was very difficult for us. So we reacted, the way in which we reacted was we really looked at 4 different components. So we can go to the next slide. We talked about changing our ordinances, and we did that. And even as a state, we opened up the ability to not only pick up our food and our drink options and even our shopping options from our small businesses, but our state went so far as to allow us to pick up to-go drinks, alcoholic drinks, and has maintained that to this day. We reacted as a group fairly quickly. We encouraged our citizens to stay home and stay safe. We followed the direction of our county's public health department, and our hospitals stepped up to provide many opportunities to keep individuals safe. The curbside services were huge for us, but we had to figure out a way to make that happen. And that's where Morgan Sites stepped up and really took over. And I'll let the councilwoman describe what they did here in just a second. You know, we looked at online assistance. Our chamber, we're a nationally accredited Missouri Main Street, and we have a Missouri Main Street community. And so our chamber was going through new leadership, and our Main Street program was in place and had been in place for quite some time, and had just started a marketing program to teach all of these businesses what they needed to be doing to take themselves online and be successful online. And I think we got one program in, and then we had to go silent, and we weren't teaching that program anymore. And then we also had a lot of conversation as an internal team about how do we move events outside? How do we bring people together outdoors and have events? Our local Rotary Club felt it was important to continue meeting, so we met at the golf course in an outside pavilion at large tables spread apart so that we could continue working towards how we were going to help our community. And then we also used our CARES funding that came down to our community level, and we decided that we wanted to help the partners help the businesses. So instead of giving business money directly to businesses, we went out and looked for the partners like the Chamber of Commerce, the Downtown Excelsior Partnership, and our museum, and said, how do we help you help others? And so that's where our funding, that's where we focused a lot of our funding on, to help people and keep people engaged. If we can go to our next slide.
Well, for a small business to have an online presence was huge during COVID-19. As a tech company, we were considered essential workers at Morgan Sites. We are a small family-owned company, so we took our responsibility to heart. Getting small businesses online with a shopping cart was the right thing to do. We understood the need to have businesses to return to when we were allowed to go out again. Ironically, the pandemic created new benefits for the tech industry. While it took great toll on others, it provided a safe environment for people to do business, and more people began to trust in online technology. We were able to help 4 restaurants provide online ordering with curbside pickup. We provided a website to retailers such as jewelry store, art gallery, clothing store, and antique mall. We helped an auction company get online, a meat market, and a rural church congregation. Many businesses we helped are our neighbors and friends, and we wanted them to make it through the difficult time financially while protecting the health of our community. We built the websites for free, including buying the URLs to businesses who wanted our small business recovery plan. We were going to host the sites for free for 2 months, but when we saw the coronavirus lingering on and on, we expanded our hosting to 6 months. We kept existing clients' websites, including the City of Excelsior Springs, the City of Lawson, our hospital, and 3 area chambers current with pandemic information from our state and county health departments.
What came out of Morgan Sites' work was local news media picked up on the story, and suddenly they weren't just helping our community, they were helping communities throughout our region and helping all of them to help small business. And because of that, a number of small businesses were able to be maintained. Our restaurant business said that the community as a whole stepped up and really did an amazing job of keeping them, helping them to keep their employees working. And also, just when you wanted to do something, it gave you an opportunity. It started new conversations. How do we create bigger, better outdoor venues for individuals to participate in? And so we have a Lithia Landing that is currently being fundraised for, that will build a large outdoor venue that will allow for up to 100 people to be on a deck at any given time to pick a meal up from a restaurant and go sit outside to eat, which is really incredibly important. If we could go to the next slide. You know, what we learned was to intentionally look for opportunities when they presented themselves. So we realized that the cavalry wasn't coming, that if there was going to be something done, we were going to have to do it ourselves. And we pulled together teams that made us incredibly successful at accomplishing things. We took the attitude that because we could work together, we could get things done. And we solidified and strengthened our relationships that we had been working on. When we intentionally look for opportunities that presented themselves, I mean that we used this time to go after grants and to complete studies. So we spent 2 years during the pandemic just applying for a RAISE grant that allowed us to receive $32 million in transportation to address pedestrian work on the west side of our community. And if we could go to the next slide. Those great partnerships, they existed. We didn't have to ask. Many people offered to be a partner with us. We continued our conversations to get people outside. We are currently on 4 different bike routes that go through our community that go throughout the United States. And so we have seen opportunities, and we've continued to strengthen those conversations and have those conversations so that we can keep aligning our strategies and our resources together to keep us moving in the same direction. So it's, you know, for us, there were a lot of lessons to be learned from a pandemic. We appreciated the opportunity to do that and decided that we were going to intentionally look for successes and build on what we already did well, which was the partnership piece. I think you heard from both Mayor Feeney and us talk about the importance of those partnerships. And I think as we work on these programs, that's incredibly important. And I think we are leaving a little bit of time yet for questions then.
Yes, thank you. So we'll go into the Q&A. There have been some questions in the chat and the Q&A feature. Some folks have already answered. So thank you for everybody for just going in and typing those answers in. A question that I have really for everybody. We often hear about the negative sides of living in rural areas. You don't have the same abilities with funding and those sorts of things. However, I like to kind of turn that around. I feel like these were very positive stories that came out of these rural areas. So give me one benefit from your perspective of living in a rural area. I mean, just one. What makes it? What do you have going for you there? Just one though. Don't list out a whole list of them. But Mayor Feeney, if you want to go first, what's a benefit that you see in living in a rural area?
Sure, happy to answer this one. So I grew up in Seattle, and living in Chillicothe is a little bit different. So for my generation, it would have been Sim City. I think for younger people, it's The Sims. I tell people, like, living in a smaller town, you can poke and prod and do things, and the impact is pretty immediate, and it's much easier to pull off sometimes. So some of the sidewalks that we built, you know, I have a lot of pride in those sidewalks. And they make a dramatic impact. And the overall cost of some of those things isn't so bad. And so sometimes I think about, you know, if you're in a city with 500,000 or 1 million people, some of these initiatives, you know, there's neighborhoods bigger than our city, and so getting that feedback, making the right decisions. Over the last 8 years, I've definitely had sort of almost paralysis when you're trying to decide like what the right decision is and how to do things just perfectly. And I think that can compound when there's more and more people. So I think those little wins, making an impact quickly, those are all definitely things that make a impact in small communities or rural communities pretty exciting.
Thank you. Sonia and Melinda, what are your thoughts?
I think what I saw in our community, and I've continued to see, and it's what I believe makes us stand out and be different, is that when there is something that has to be done in our community, we take the initiative to take care of that ourselves. So I've often laughed and told people that we raised $100,000 for not-for-profits doing celebrity bartending in 1 year. And so when there's a need to be taken care of, I believe that the strength in our community and in many small communities is in the ability to just put boots on the ground and take care of it. And I think that's what sets us aside from many of the other communities, even in our own county.
I agree. I think that because we are such a small community, we know strengths and weaknesses in our community that are people-based. So when we have needs that need to be addressed, we can usually figure out somebody in our community that can help make that happen. And so we network people, we network our organizations, our businesses to make ourselves stronger. And we have gone into this policy called Thrive, that we've put committees in place to address the things that our public sees that they want addressed, which is basically our health, our housing, things of that nature. And so we've got committees that are ready and active constantly to help with any community-based needs.
Great, thank you. One quick question for Anushka. how can one make a case for complete streets and active transportations in their community? Some of our audience members could be thinking about, well, how can I do this where I live? What are your thoughts on that? Last question.
Yeah, and I'll keep it brief, but I think one thing that I learned through the process of this report and just as part of my work is that we end up thinking about complete streets as a transportation solution, and siloing complete streets as a transportation solution does not help, because every time we've been out in the community for community engagement or having a conversation, I think what has more impact is talking about how it impacts their daily lives. What is the physical activity impact? And these investments also have economic impacts, like we've heard today from Excelsior Springs, from Mayor Luke. It's a whole package. It's not talking about it as a transportation solution is probably not the best way to go about it. And thinking about all the other tangents that affect every community member's daily lives, better social connections, better ways to access different places, go to a park, go do, even if it's jobs, also recreation. It's a combination of everything that ends up being, I like to think about it as a skeleton for the city. Like you need it to get to places for things you need to do in your daily life. And it's not just a transportation solution.
Great, thank you. So you all are off the hot seats now, no more questions. I just want to say to our audience, be sure to check out the links from and the chat that Ayana put in there. Somebody asked about a recording. There will be a recording of this made available and sent out to those who registered. And then a round of applause. Thank you for everybody for attending. And then a special thank you to our presenters for sharing your time, expertise, experience. We really appreciate that. And I have to give a special thank you, even more special thank you to Ayana for putting all of this together. I know she hates the spotlight, but she does an amazing job. So thank you to Ayana, thank you to everybody, and thank you to our presenters so much. Everybody have a great rest of your day. Thank you.